21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
What is IFTTT and how can it be used to accelerate digital transformation?
Sure. So IFT, I think first of all, it says, we pronounce it IFT, it's spelled IFTTT. Yeah. And you pronounced it just fine. It's we've got a little bit of a goofy name with the 3 T's in there. So we often get too upset when someone pronounces it a different way. But IFT or IFTTT, it stands for if this then that. And that's really kind of the basic premise. If something happens, if you get a new, like follower on Twitter or a new, customer on your customer mailing list in MailChimp, then do something else. Add that to a spreadsheet, trigger some type of other email. We've also been known in the past for lots of kind of consumer IoT solutions. What we call an applet is kind of an individual unit of if something happens, then do something else. So something as simple as, if somebody rings your doorbell and, then blink the lights, right? Rather than play the doorbell sound if you're on a Zoom call. Or we've had a lot of people use a service called Auticon, and they do hearing aids. So folks that are, kind of hearing impaired are able to kind of get a doorbell ring or some kind of motion captured on one of their webcams or kind of outdoor security cameras. So really the possibilities are endless, and the kind of foundational kind of starting mission, if you will, is allowing regular folks, non-technical folks, non-engineers, to do what engineers can do. So it's, kind of like programming without ever talking about programming. So kind of if this and that is something plucked from the world of programming. And we've spent a lot of time and a lot of our kind of expertise is around making that user experience as simple as possible. So no one should actually feel like they're programming, but they end up with essentially an end result that is a new application or new kind of mini app. That's where the word applet comes from, that's specific to their needs and solves their problem in kind of a unique and personal way. You sign up on IFT, just like signing up to Spotify or Netflix. And you can create your own from scratch. So we have basically kind of like a wizard that we call the DIY creator. And you basically kind of click through, if, and you click a button and it shows you the list of, almost 800 some odd services, from Twitter to iRobot. You pick a service, you pick a trigger is the kind of this part. And then you pick an action, which is the that part. And so, that's kind of the most simple version of if this and that. We, of course, have kind of additional, if this, when this happens, and then maybe you send a tweet that's delayed by 2 hours or something like that. So you can get kind of more powerful tools to build something a little bit more custom. And that's how we actually generate revenue. That's our business is. We have a Pro and Pro Plus account, so it's a direct-to-consumer business. You can enable 2 applets for free, and then after that you have to pay. And if you want the additional kind of power user features or more powerful tools, you pay as well. And then the other way that you can enable an applet, and this is really kind of the easiest and most powerful way, is you can take something that you've created in your DIY flow and then publish it for others to use. So you can kind of explore based on, the services that you've already connected. We have like a really powerful kind of recommendation engine. And you can kind of see, okay, here are the things I have. What are other people doing with these services? How are other people finding ways to solve problems? And that is even simpler. You basically just click the connect button and you might have to fill out some fields, like what Twitter username are you following, or what's the name of the spreadsheet that you're going to add this information to, or add a row to. So really simple and straightforward that way. They're both really easy, but we found that the more that we can kind of piggyback off of the creative ideas of the community, and then help those folks actually publish and kind of get those out there to others, whether people actually use those applets that are published, or kind of ignite a new idea and some new thinking for one that they create their own. That's been kind of something we figured out 2 years in, and have really never looked back. So there's almost, like I said, infinite number of ways nearly to connect these various services, and we're always kind of surprised by what people come up with, despite all the experience we've had and all the different use cases we've seen. We're very lucky. We launched, it was like December 2010 when we launched into private beta. And really just kind of off the strength of the idea and the initial kind of design, maybe even bucked some of the traditional advice of kind of getting the roughest MVP out there and then iterating. It was still pretty rough, but it was really polished. Like a big part of, I think, what made IFT work in the early days is we thought a lot about that user experience. How do we make it as simple as possible for a user to do something that is often thought of as complex, or you have to go to, kind of get a computer engineering degree to do. And so I think that allowed it to kind of take on this kind of, semi-viral aspect, where people were really excited about the idea just by using it for the first time. And so had actually some buddies that came from the MIT Media Lab, kind of shared it in some of those, like, I guess they were email lists. And then, through some of those folks that posted it to like Hacker News, kind of spread organically from there. But I think what's really worked for us over the years is that, IFT can't do anything without the individual brands themselves, right? So, Twitter and Facebook and iRobot and Philips Hue and so on and so forth. And so for each one of those brands that build and launch on the platform, and the vast majority of those are now built and maintained by developers at those companies. So they'll build something and then launch it, and then they kind of turn around and kind of then advertise that to their users as another thing that they can do with their tool or with their product. And so in that way, there's kind of this flywheel that just naturally kind of forms between the brands, which we call services, and the users. So for each new service, we kind of get to tap into all their existing users as something that they can do. So it's almost like people putting the Twitter logo or the Facebook or Instagram logo at the bottom of their website, right? They're basically advertising not only their user on that platform or their profile on that platform, but they're also kind of advertising that social network itself, right? So that's probably not the most powerful kind of network effect that Facebook and Twitter has, but it's still something that is very meaningful in terms of driving new users. So we see 6,000 to 7,000 new users sign up every day now, and that's been kind of growing or staying steady really throughout the duration of the company's life.
Intelligent. Any other specific strategy? So to ensure ongoing customer engagement, so you're in for all folks that are in D2C stratosphere. Any other strategies to ensure that ongoing customer engagement?
Emails, obviously. I think being very considerate about when a user signs up, what are kind of the kind of campaigns and journeys we kind of take them through. And how do we do that in a way that isn't just like spamming their inbox? How do we kind of, get rid of the things that don't work and improve or double down on the things that do? Me, like anybody else, is getting tons and tons of emails, tons of push notifications. We have mobile apps on iOS and Android, so push notifications are big for the folks that download those. But really trying to figure out what is the right kind of trigger life cycle, if you will. What are the situations when a user comes back or when a user downloads the mobile app? Not only do they have a new interface, but the mobile app actually brings in and connects a lot of other very powerful services on the platform. So things like photos or your location through your mobile app or phone. And so once someone actually signs into the mobile app, we then have a slew of additional things that we can recommend them that they can easily enable that they kind of weren't able to before. So kind of finding those right moments in the kind of overall customer journey from sign up to becoming an actual customer and paying for Pro or Pro Plus to help them or encourage them to kind of do the next thing or kind of learn more or take the next step.
For that level of scalability, what measures are taken by IFT?
I think one of the things we care a lot about is not only kind of top of funnel, how many kind of page views and unique users are looking at our website or looking at our mobile app pages. What's that conversion rate? How many people are actually looking at those and then signing up? What are the pages that kind of matter most? Is it the home page? And for us, we've had a lot of luck by actually kind of creating specific pages that showcase the connections between two services. So, what can you do with Google Drive and Instagram? And there's kind of a whole page for that. And that's what a lot of people end up searching for, is kind of searching for, like, how do I connect Google Drive and Instagram, or something very general like that, but very specific in terms of the names of the services. From there, signups, what we look at closely is really kind of in that first week or month of the user signing up. How do we get them to go from a sign up doing nothing but having an account to enabling that first applet? And so we've done a lot in terms of looking at onboarding, the first of like emails and other recommendations. What's the landing page after you sign up? What's the landing page after you sign up and then come back for the first time? And we really are trying to get someone to go from 0 to 1 applet. So if we can get someone to at least turn on or create that first applet, obviously there's a high degree, a very high likelihood we get them to do the second and the third. And so for us, we've kind of fluctuated between 50 and 60% of those folks that sign up in that first week actually enable an applet, which we think is excellent. So we'd always love to do better than that. But I think it's, kind of the focus that we've had really since day one is like, how do we help people get started? Because it is both kind of daunting. There's, anything that has infinite possibilities or almost feels like a creative toolkit. It's really hard to know where to start, but it's also so simple. Once you do it once and you come out the other end with something that works and, creates value, saves you time, saves you money, it's so much easier to come back and do it again. And so I think that's something we look really closely at. We also look at, how many folks can we get to go from like signing up on the website to actually downloading one of the mobile apps. Once somebody, even if they haven't enabled that first applet, once they download and sign into the mobile apps, they're even more likely then to both find something they want to do, the first applet they turn on, but actually much more likely to come back to the app over time. One of the things that's, I think, very unique to our business, and maybe other tools out there now as well, but especially kind of in the consumer space, is our business isn't really predicated on getting people to come back and look at our interface. In fact, there's a lot of customers that are, happy as can be with IFT that haven't opened the app in a month or 2 months. They enabled 3 or 4 things, and maybe they come back, every few months to see what's new or to check on the things they already have running. But we're able to kind of create value once someone's enabled an applet in the background. So a lot of the other kind of engagements that we measure, we of course measure, how often are people coming back to the app after they've signed up. But I think even more important than that is, how many applets have they enabled, and then how often do those applets run? And so we've had kind of various ways to measure engagement based on, having at least one applet enabled, but then even further than that, having that applet run within a month. So we've kind of gone down a path of kind of getting more and more specific, and we've actually come full circle back to kind of considering an engaged user or customer as someone that has at least one applet that's turned on and working. because we're creating at least some value for them. So that's, I think, a more simplistic measure, and may not capture, like the perfect group of, fully engaged users, but it's so much easier for the team to think about and for us to kind of build towards. And we, of course, measure the other kind of, when you have 2 or 3 or 4 applets, and then how often those applets run, those are still important, but those aren't kind of the main focus areas in terms of getting someone engaged. We're instead, one of the things we learned, that the value of an applet can vary widely, and the number of times that applet runs isn't necessarily a great measure, right? So a good example would be, say you have like a Ring doorbell that has a motion sensor on it. So you could, take the picture from the motion sensor, save that to your Google Drive every time it captures motion, and that could happen 3, 4, 5 times a day, right? A bird or a dog runs by, or someone delivers a package, and so that's valuable for the user. They have this archive of all these pictures over time, but it's maybe less valuable than, say, having an alarm system. So say you had some kind of alarm system or camera in a spot that was really critical that no one ever went to, and if someone went there, that probably meant they were trying to steal something. That may never run, or it may run once every 2 years, and when that does happen, it's bad. But if it works and it sends you the notification, or it somehow prevents someone from stealing something from you, well, that's incredibly valuable, right? So that's an example of something that, again, may never run, or may only run once, but creates a whole lot of value, where something that runs 4 or 5 times a day also creates value, but I think much smaller. So we kind of learned that the hard way through experimentation, and really trying to think about what is the value that's being kind of perceived or being given by us to the customer, and then what then leads to that customer doing something more, adding another applet, and then eventually becoming an IFTTT Pro customer.
How did you ensure the whole system to be both secure and efficient and reliable? Or is it again too deep question?
Oh no, I mean that's a huge question, but I think maybe if you take all 3 of those, is secure, efficient, reliable, maybe even starting with secure. So for us, I think one of the most important things that we knew going in was that the more someone uses IFTTT, the more IFTTT becomes really kind of a centralized hub with access. It's not necessarily as important as the phone, if you think about all the places you've signed into with your phone, but it gets close, right? Like when you connect your Google Drive, you can kind of read and write to Google Drive. When you connect your Ring doorbell cam, you can kind of see the doorbell, or see when someone rings the doorbell. When you connect location, we now have access to that location. And so we knew that we needed to be very, very careful with how that information was accessed. So right from the get-go, we really kind of conceived of any of those like API tokens, any of the credentials that we needed to sign into those other services or access those APIs on the user's behalf were stored separately, were stored encrypted, were stored in a way that, what would be essentially impossible for someone, even if they somehow broke into our system, to actually do anything with, right? Like there's just so many kind of layers of kind of protection there. I think the other thing was, and we kind of have been around long enough, like I said, launched in December 2010. When we launched, the idea of like multi-factor or 2-factor authentication wasn't really a thing, or at least it wasn't a thing that most consumers were aware of. If you worked for a big enterprise somewhere, they might ask you to put in some kind of authentication code or SMS. And so the second that was kind of gaining steam, we made sure to add that, and then also made sure to add that to our onboarding process. So we haven't quite gone so far as to like force users to do 2-factor authentication, but we basically make it so the user has to make an informed decision, right? They know it's available, and we've told them multiple times, and it's something that is kind of recommended to them in a way that I think is really helpful. So we have a lot of people that use that 2-factor, and that ultimately, especially if you're doing it without SMS kind of has its own shortcomings. But if you're doing that with like an authentication app that's generating a code, it's about as secure as you can get. So, all those are kind of some of the steps we've taken. Do things like annual security audits, black and white hat testing, because all those credentials and, all that information we have, if that were to be breached, it would really, I think, undercut a lot of the trust that we've built. The other thing, to say from a security perspective, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be, simple. That word is overused and can mean so many different things. But oftentimes systems become less secure because they're more confusing or hard to use. So even something as simple as trying to figure out where you set up two-factor authentication or how you can get your recovery codes or what the steps are to do that. We found that by keeping the design and the user interface as simple as possible, people are then more likely to either maintain that two-factor authentication or kind of reset a password in a very simple and secure way. So I think it's some of that kind of design background and user experience background that actually I think ends up making the system more secure, because it encourages more people to actually do the secure thing, use two-factor authentication and so on and so forth. So that's the security bucket. The kind of reliability bucket is actually something that we've, I think, improved at over time. When we first launched, I would say we weren't super reliable. One of the things we did get right, though, was right from day one, we had an idea of kind of like an activity log. What happened? So if we did run into some kind of error, say you deleted your Twitter account, or in some services when you change your password, and I'm not sure if Twitter does this anymore or not, but when you change your password, it also essentially deactivates all of the OAuth or API keys that you've given out to third-party services. And that's kind of part of that security measure. Those services are assuming that a password change means you're concerned about someone having access to your account that maybe shouldn't. And so in those situations, we would return an error in that activity log. Hey, there was a problem posting a tweet to Twitter or adding a row to a spreadsheet on Google Spreadsheets. And so then from there, even though that information was still very general, you may not even say that, hey, your API key is invalid. It might just say there was an error. Users could kind of self-serve and figure out that problem. That activity log has now gotten, I think, a lot more robust, but also we've gotten a lot more reliable in that we're able to, I think, detect problems with APIs in general, right? So if there's, pick another service, let's say iRobot. So iRobot's API is experiencing some kind of downtime or some type of latency. In the past, say if it's latency, we would just kind of blindly continue to make API calls, and then all of those users' applets would fail until that was rectified. And in some cases, even adding to that downtime by kind of an unintentional DDoS attack, right? Where basically sending all these API requests that are failing, and that's making more API requests fail. So it just kind of builds and builds and builds. And so we've built a lot of different systems that kind of detect those problems within a certain range or percentage of requests. If they start failing, we basically stop making requests. And then we alert the developer. So there's a whole kind of other side of the business that most end users don't see. But on the developer platform side of things, you basically have a whole set of alerts and dashboards and tools that allow you to understand the health of your APIs that are connected to IFTTT, recent problems. So, even just having some of those alerts allows developers like iRobot to come back to the platform and fix something. And so that's one of the ways that I think we've gotten a lot more reliable, is just kind of learning the hard way that, the more APIs you have and the more diverse those APIs are, the more likely at any given moment, right now we probably have 6 or 7 APIs of the 800 on the platform that are almost completely down or having some type of problem. So it's, nothing's ever 100%. But we're able to kind of gracefully recover and not add to the problems that those APIs are already experiencing. Efficiency is another one. I think there's both efficiency in terms of like our costs, what does it cost us to run an applet? But then also efficiency in terms of the developer, and then efficiency in terms of the end user experience. So if you think about the end user is probably the simplest to talk about first. Is a lot of situations, it's more valuable to get something in real time, right? Or get something near real time. So if you've got a hearing aid and motion is detected in your backyard, you probably don't necessarily need to know about that 20 minutes later. It's, whatever was causing that motion is already gone. And so in those cases, we've been able to kind of tighten that period. So when we first launched, I think there were actually very few APIs that had any kind of real notion of like real time or webhooks or some type of subscribe and get a notification when something happens. So everything was based on a polling period. Basically a cron job, for the folks that are engineers out there, is a cron job would run like every 15 minutes or every hour, depending on the situation. Check an API, 99% of the time they'd get the same data that they got back 15 minutes ago. So nothing new had changed. Store some, very small piece of information that says, where we are in the serial chain of events. And then if there is a new event in that chain, take action, save it to a spreadsheet or start your iRobot Roomba. And over time, what we found is as we built our own platform and as APIs got more sophisticated, it was in everybody's best interest, the developer, the IF platform's interest and the end user's interest to make a lot of those APIs essentially webhooks, to use a very general term. But essentially saying, okay, for this user with this particular ID, we're interested in updates, when motion is detected or updates when they get a new email in their inbox. So rather than us asking the same question over and over again, we'll basically let you tell us where the new information is. One of the things that we actually did from a kind of a reliability standpoint is rather than only depend on the information coming from that webhook notification or them saying, hey, there's some new motion detected in the backyard, we often deploy what we call kind of like a push then pull. So like they tell us something new has happened. They might include enough of the information in that notification for us to actually take action. So that's a little bit faster, but to make sure that we're, not duplicating events or not missing one, we basically use that notification as the, kind of the trigger or the event that kicks off a poll. So everything is still ultimately poll based, but the notification allows us to poll much more efficiently. And so, rather than polling every 15 minutes, in some situations, if there's a webhook notification, we poll once an hour or once a day, just to make sure we hadn't missed something or we hadn't dropped the notification. But that, back to this idea of reliability, was one of the things I think we got right? Like a lot of those APIs, do send enough information in that notification payload to take action or do something with it. But on either side, that notification may never have been sent, or, IFT itself might've been down and we could have dropped that notification and never seen it. So if you just rely on that, you're basically relying on the uptime of multiple services at any given moment. So I think that was another thing that we kind of, I think, got right out of the gate.
Linden, how do you feed your brain?
Really, it's a combination. I think exercise is so key. Even though it's not necessarily learning something new while exercising. To me, exercise, at least the right kind of exercise, some type of cardio, running. I like to run, bike, and swim. I don't consider myself a triathlete as much as I like to do the three things. All three of those things are really like a forced meditation, right? And kind of a meditation in a very different way. I used to be a big meditator as well. It's not something I do quite as regularly, probably a couple times a week now, but I used to do twice a day, 10, 20 minutes. But what I found is that I actually got more out of the exercise. So not only, staying healthy and fit, but like getting into kind of that runner's high, that zone where you've kind of tuned everything out. You're maybe seeing something interesting. I live in San Francisco, so especially any runner bike, you're always seeing something cool and new and beautiful. But like that allows you, I think, to kind of open up to creative ideas or kind of get to a place where you can make a decision that I think would be much harder to make if you were just like thinking about that decision all day. So, maybe counterintuitive, but I think keep your brain healthy. I think it starts with keeping your body healthy and finding the type of exercise that allows you to get into kind of that meditative, almost zoned out state. From keeping the brain healthy, one of the company values, one of my own kind of personal values, are almost like I sometimes like to say, kind of like the secret to life, is always learning. And I think it's not only a way to help yourself get through mistakes, right? If you can kind of approach every mistake as a learning opportunity and try not to do it the same way twice. I think that's really kind of a powerful, but also, kind of a cliche thing. But it also has to do with, I think a lot of engineers or people with an engineering background somehow naturally either have an affinity for this or like through just even their professional careers learn this. You've got to continue your education throughout your entire life, and I think especially like software engineering is, I think, very conducive to this. You might have learned PHP and Perl 20 years ago, but if those are your kind of core skill sets today, maybe a little bit harder to get a job. There's always an exception, right? I'm sure like the best Perl developer can work on a system that was built 30 years ago and make tons of money. But you're incentivized to stay very current. And maybe other professions, like I would imagine maybe a medical profession might have something similar to that. But if you kind of apply that no matter what your background is, and apply that not only to like your deep expertise, right? So if you went to business school, you probably have a deep expertise in finance or something like management or managing other people. So obviously staying current there, but really thinking of it like a T-shape. You have kind of a singular deep expertise where you want to be like the best in the world, but you actually can improve or strengthen that expertise the more broad the things you maybe are interested in. You maybe don't have that same depth, but the more broad you can make that interest, the more kind of unique ways and unique perspectives you have. Yeah. So I think for me, that interest is always changing. Very interested in geology or maps. For a long time, I collected maps and just could like look at a map, almost like reading a book, or just kind of looking at a Where's Waldo. You want to look at almost every little pixel or a piece of that map. Right now, I'm huge into audiobooks. I used to read, and all the people that brag about how many books they read and how fast, it's such a silly thing, but it's just like the more info that you can consume that you're actually interested in, and so it doesn't matter the quality of that. If you're really interested in cartoons and you are watching cartoons in an engaged way where you're learning something or thinking about how someone made that cartoon, it's not garbage, right? Like that's still, you're kind of actively engaged. It's not just like a passive, thing that's washing over you. And so I've been, really into reading regular books, but now audiobooks. And I went so deep, I think, even in some of the business books that I don't think I've read a business book for 3 or 4 years, just because I almost like overdosed on business books, right? But I've been very interested in things like history, or, I think one of the books that I would recommend that I'm actually going back to, sort of kind of a series of books by a woman named Lynn Taggart. And she's kind of like a scientific reporter, but also kind of on the cutting edge or fringes of things that I think a lot of scientists don't consider scientific. But she's not reporting on magic or something. It's actual real studies for how information is, transferred. So she has a book. I think the biggest book that she's had is called The Field. And they talk a lot about how essentially every living organism, and I think almost an extension, everything, every collection of atoms actually transmits photons and transmits a measurable information field. And like one of the ways that people have measured this, and I think some of these studies are done by serious people at serious universities. Stanford had a big program in the past that kind of gets mentioned in all the conspiracy theory blogs. But like, there's been studies by very legit people that are, very statistically significant, where situations are like you can have like a plant in one room, put a person in another room, and have the person basically think either positive thoughts, like I'm going to walk in the room and like water that plant or, treat that plant really well, or negative thoughts. And I'm going to walk in that room and I'm going to rip the plant's leaves off. And you can measure an active, like a statistically significant difference in the reaction by the plant. So the person, based on how they're thinking about a plant in another room, can communicate with the plant. And that's like, that's crazy, right? Like people would say that that's, mumbo jumbo, but, I think read the book and kind of come away and see what you think. There's something actually there. So it's like stuff like that almost feels, kind of magical or fringe or interesting that I've kind of been drawn to lately, and trying to kind of suss out like what's actually real, what is kind of scientifically proven, but just kind of shunned or ignored, versus, what are the stuff that, people are spamming YouTube with conspiracy videos about. So I think, that's my current interest, but that'll change probably 2 years from now. It'll be something very different. I think part of being an entrepreneur is almost like defaulting to you. Like you have to be an optimist, right? Like any business, any venture, it is an adventure, right? Like we've kind of lost the idea of like explorers that are like mapping the globe, or the Shackleton is going to like cross the Antarctic or something. Like so much of that is we have astronauts, but right, like there's only a handful of those. So the idea of like a dangerous adventure, I think one of the only outlets for those that are kind of interested in that is entrepreneurship. Right? Like it's not physically dangerous necessarily, depending on how crazy you are, but it is a risk, right? Like you're taking a risk. You're usually leaving a job. If you have a family, it's an even bigger risk. And so I think in many ways, having that sense of optimism and kind of being able to take something that, almost everybody else thinks is garbage or isn't going to work, or I would never, in San Francisco, I would never live there, because of all the homeless folks and all the things that you read about crime and so on and so forth. But then you can turn that around and say, well, actually, because no one else wants to live here, there's an opportunity there. And I think if you're able to look at it from a slightly different perspective and see those opportunities, you can basically apply that approach to anything, not just building your successful business, but life in general. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur or a successful content creator, just starting to build your own personal business, IFT, which stands for If This Then That, is building solutions that are going to help save you time. Sign up and find those solutions to connect all of the services that you use to run your business at IFTTT.com.
21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.